Ellie has always had romantic ideas about drug addicts. Tragic souls drawn to needles and pills have been her obsession ever since the death of her junkie mother. But when Ellie lands in an upscale rehab clinic where nothing is what it seems, she'll find another, more dangerous kind of romance. From the award-winning team of Ed Brubaker and Shawn Phillips comes a pop and drug culture-fueled tale of a young girl seeking darkness and what she finds there. I'm talking about Ed Brubaker and Shawn Phillips. My heroes have always been junkies. This is a 72-page, full-color, hardcover original graphic novel. That's right, it's a FC HC OGN. 72 pages is a little bit slim. Would have probably made for like a prestige format comic once upon a time. But I think it's a nice length for this. It's tough to call it a graphic novel. It's more like a short story or a novella, I guess. But these terms don't really mean all that much anyway. So this is the latest book by the team of Ed Brubaker and Shawn Phillips. Ed Brubaker, the writer, the Broob, was a guy who's done everything in comics, from indie all the way up to superhero stuff, and then back to indie again, and his roots. So I know he lived at one time in the Bay Area. He used to work at a friend of mine's comic book store named Rory Root, a legendary store called Comic Relief in Berkeley. And Rory used to love to tell the story of how Ed was fired for stealing from the store. And but yet was back there years later to do signings when he became a respected comics professional. I first remember reading his comics back in 1997 or so, when his early indie work was collected. A book he did called Low Life, which was really just about himself, his early life, or sort of similar type character, getting involved with petty street crime and sort of a young adult coming of age type level, doing a lot of drugs, stealing a lot of stuff. Years later, he came to Marvel. He followed up Brian Michael Bendis' highly acclaimed run on Daredevil, and in my mind, exceeded it. I like the Brubaker stuff better than the Bendis stuff, and I really like the Bendis stuff. Brubaker just has this sort of 70s action movie mentality that he put in play on Daredevil, bringing back characters, old Daredevil villains, that we hadn't seen for a long time, like the Matador and Fancy Dan, and characters like that, and giving them sort of an underground crime realistic spin. Before that, he had been working for years in DC Comics, also doing books like Batman books like Gotham Central, which was sort of like a true crime meets Gotham City book that was really well received, really interesting and fun to read, and sort of overlooked these days. Now, of course, after all that, he got on to Captain America, where he did a new run with Steve Epting in 2005, and reintroduced characters like Bucky, Captain America's former partner, who, as we all know from the movies now, was not really killed in World War II, but was kept alive as a sleeper agent, the Winter Soldier. And, of course, we know where that went. The Captain America, the Winter Soldier, the movie, is regarded by many as one of, if not the best, of the Marvel movies. It's really fantastic. It's a political thriller, like from the 70s. Personally, I think it's a little bit overrated on its plot, with the SHIELD helicarriers and all that stuff, but it was a really fun movie to watch. The action was great. The tone and the pacing and everything was fantastic. And a good portion, if not all of that, is straight out of the Brubaker run on Captain America. So if you haven't read that, do that. Shawn Phillips is someone that I first saw in his work with Ed Brubaker on Sleeper. Sleeper was like a kind of a superhero, super powered crime story that was really good, but I felt like it didn't need the superhero, supernatural science fiction elements, and it was the crime stuff that was really interesting and shown through. And so later on, Brubaker and Phillips reunited for Criminal. And My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies is really, just seems like could be another issue of Criminal, or related to Criminal. It seems like just a short story that didn't have an exact place to live, and was a great chance for them to try the, FC HC OGN original graphic novel format, meaning this was never in comic book form before, if I wasn't clear about that. Not in floppy format, anyway. So here's the front and back cover. And that's where I read that little copy at the beginning of the video from. And there's some nice words here from Joe Hill, who I think is Stephen King's son and is a popular writer in his own regard on comics and otherwise. He said, like Scorsese and De Niro, Brubaker and Phillips are the unmatched masters of a certain kind of storytelling. A new title from the sharpshooters behind Fatale and Criminal is reason enough to go on living. That's pretty high praise, and I think they live up to it. You know, when you look at this book, it doesn't look like any other book on the stands that you're used to. You know, this is a crime book. There are no supernatural or superhero or science fiction elements. It's really a crime and romance story, and the color palette is fascinating and unique, and it really fits this sort of pastel, brightly colored, but, you know, toned, depending on the scene. Really, really works well for me. The story's it's got elements of like Drugstore Cowboy, and you know, the main character is sort of in love with the idea of doing drugs, and this is a theme that's come up again and again in some of Brubaker's earliest work, especially. Now, Shawn Phillips, the beauty of this book, there are no real action scenes. I think a gun gets pointed at somebody at some point. The real work and miracle that's going on here by Phillips is in the staging and the subtlety. You know, in a moment like this where she's stealing a pack of cigarettes from the lady at rehab, is something that you could stage in a lot of different ways, but the way they chose to do it is just subtle and fun. It conveys the point and the mood without having to sort of like shove the action down your face. We didn't need 3 panels of her sneaking the cigarettes, for instance. We get a caption and a sort of behind the back view, and that does it. That might seem like a simple thing, but that takes a lot of experience and years working in comics to make it flow so seamlessly and to just work well. So I recommend this book. My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies. It's $16.99, hardcover. It's 72 pages. It's not going to take you that long to read, but you're going to enjoy it. And I think it's a beautiful object as far as books are concerned, and I really love the way it feels in my hands. It's got sort of a spot varnish on the cover that's a little hard to pick up on camera, but it's a lovely book, and it's proof that comics aren't just about science fiction and big explosions and crazy concepts, which they are great at. Don't get me wrong, they're fantastic at that, but they're just as good or even better at showing subtle moments and small moments and stories about real things and real people. And, you know, a lot of people like to confuse comic books and superheroes, or confusing the medium and the genre. And if you know me, you know I hate that, and I'll talk your ear off about it. But maybe that's another video. So for now, get to your comic book store or bookstore and pick up My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies. You will enjoy it.